Many of you are probably familiar with end of month, the end of month function, right? So if I have a date and I want to create a value that is 3 months from that date, I use the EO month function, and 3 months later I've got, let's format this nicely, and I've got this end of month, right? But quite often we work with quarters. Wouldn't it be cool if I could have a function called EOQUARTER, where it tells me, whatever the user gives you as a date, it actually gives you the end of that quarter. And even better, what if I can increment as many quarters as I want? So it's just like the EO month function, but for quarters. And that's what we're gonna do here. All right, so let's use this first date as an example of what we're trying to go for here. So the user has put in September 12th, 2010. Well, the end of that quarter is gonna be September 30th. So what do I want to achieve here? I've got the EO month function that basically I want to, this is the end of the quarter. And so all I really want is just an EO month that just takes that date and gets me to the end of the month. I don't actually really need anything here in this particular case, right? But then if I go to the next cell, well, that doesn't work anymore because, right, I want the end of the quarter. September 30th happens to be the end of the quarter, but in this case it's 0, but in this case it actually needs to be 2, right? It needs to actually go up by a couple of months. So it needs to recognize based on the date what's going on. So the way we accomplish this, before we even get into Lambda, the way we're going to do this is we have an EO month, and then we have a formula in the month parameter that basically tries to sort that out. I'm going to copy and paste this off to the side, okay, knowing that this result just needs to be 0, and I'm going to put that result off to the side, and then I know that this result needs to be 2, and I'm going to put this off to the side just so you see how it works really clearly. Before it's harder to understand a lambda if you don't understand how the function actually works in the first place. So in this case, what's going on is it takes that month 9 divided by 3 is 3, multiplies, rounds it up, right? It's a perfect number, so 9 divided by 3, you don't need to round up. You will in a second when we get down to October. But here it's just 3 times 3 gets you 9 minus 9. And that gets you, that exactly evaluates to 0. In fact, if I hit equal here, you'll see this evaluates to 0. This one's going to evaluate to 2, or at least it should evaluate to 2, right? And it does. What is happening? So in this case, I take the month, it's 10 divided by 3. That gets you to 3 and change. It rounds up, so that gets you to 4. 4 times 3 is 12. 12 minus 10 exactly gets you to that 2 that you need. And so this formula works for whatever particular date the user is provided, and then you're in business, right? So once I'm going to bring this back in, right, and it gets me that 2 exactly as I need it. So now I have everything that I need. It gets me the end of the quarter. So no matter what the date is, this formula works. Notice it always gets you the exact end of calendar quarter that you need. Now the other parameter that I wanted in the end of quarter calculation is I also wanted the user to be able to increment by additional quarters. So I've got 2 simple columns in here that say, well, how many quarters do I want away from this period? And then all I need to do is multiply that to convert that to months and plug that into an EO month formula, and I've got exactly what I need. So for example here, if the user's in February 5th, well, we know by the formula we just built that March 31st is the end of the quarter for that date. And then if the user says, hey, what's the quarter end 2 quarters from this period? Well, then that simply increments 6 months from March 31st, 2018 and gets you to September 30th, 2018. So how are we going to lambda this up? So we're going to set this up for lambda by basically bringing this entire formula together. I just took, and why don't we do it from scratch? I'm going to move this off to the side, and I'll show you how we created this. All right, so I know that the heavy lifting is being done here, right? This is the formula that I need to really build in, but I also need to recognize that there needs to be a second argument here, right? Because I'm creating an end of quarter. So I actually need to wrap, this is going to output a specific date, right? This is outputting March, but I want a second argument. Well, how many quarters am I away from this? So I'm actually going to wrap this function. Hopefully this doesn't get too tricky. I'm going to wrap this function. I'm going to take this argument, And this is the first date argument that I need. And then I just need to extend it, I should say, by X number of months, right? So this is the actual formula that I want, right? The user gives me a date and I spit out a result that is, 4 quarters from that date, which Excel needs to convert to months because it doesn't have the ability natively to convert to quarters. That's what we're about to do. So now I just plug that into a lambda function. All I really need to do is take this entire thing, this entire argument, and plug it into a lambda. I've got really 2 parameters here, just the user-defined date and the quarters, right? The number of quarters that the user wants. And then as long as I've switched from the cell references, everything to be either the date or the quarters, I'm in business. So once I take this formula and I can test it by taking, okay, well, what's the user-defined date? I can change this to anything else, right? If I want September and I want 0 quarters from September, this will just give me September 30th, 2010, right? What I'm going to do now is I'm going to create the lambda for it, Alt-MN, new EO quarters. I think I called it EO quarter. So let's do that. I'm going to plug this in. Here's the lambda. Easy. Let's define the date. User input for date. And then the quarters. Number of quarters from the quarter end date. Okay, and here there's enough going on where it makes sense to actually explain what's going on. This formula, or this function rather, takes a user-defined date, converts it to the nearest upcoming end of quarter dates, and allows for incrementing to future quarters, right? So we can explain something like that. I'm sure there's probably a better way to articulate that, but that's what we're trying to do. So here we have the explanation. We click OK, and now we have our new lambda EO quarter. So if you give me a date, any date, my EO quarter, I want 0 quarters after the date. I just want the end of current quarter, but if I want subsequent quarters, I just keep incrementing. So hopefully this one I think is actually probably the most useful if you're doing things like that all the time. All of a sudden you don't have to go through all this work, right? You now have this very straightforward and powerful function. We use EO month all the time. Many of us also would use EO quarter quite often, right? So you could start thinking about all the ways in which you can create your own custom functions. Again, I'm giving you this file and you can see all these formulas as well.